One obstacle I always knew I was going to hit up against in making these videos is dealing with action films everyone already acknowledges as iconic, and this is a big one. Rambo First Blood Part 2 is generally considered to be the quintessential 80s action movie. Big guns, big body count, big muscles, big hair. Its protagonist is an icon for the genre, and it truly does represent a lot of what the genre at the time was all about, namely, winning the war.
War in Vietnam? War in Viet fucking Nam!
After nearly a decade of downbeat film endings,
Nobody came. Nobody cares.
reflecting society's own misgivings about the failures in Vietnam, a few movies began to turn things around with more uplifting, fist-pumping finales. A boxer who goes the distance, a scrappy group of rebels who defeat an empire, an invincible alien upholds American values. People were far from sick of hearing about Vietnam, but in 1979, Rocky II, with the definitively second chance to win message, just barely edged out Apocalypse Now at the box office. People wanted to know it was possible. People wanted hope. They wanted to believe. Going back to Uncommon Valor and Missing in Action, the two films which most clearly inspired this sequel, the loss of men and honor in the Vietnam War was still a touchy subject. But who better to take things and turn them back around than America's favorite underdog?
Just a matter of applying yourself.
You've got very firm views about what kind of films, though, the people are ready to receive. Sentimentality, you're not afraid of, are you?
No, sentimentality is just a highfalutin word for heart, for guts, for things that don't deal with the mind but deal with the soul. And I become emotionally involved with music that really brings up some kind of emotional feeling. I feel that films can do that. Rocky was a very, very simple story, but it didn't touch the mind, it touched the heart. And I'm not saying that there's not room for many, many other types of films, of course there are, but I feel as though no one should shy away from the word corniness or sentimentality.
And what is it you want?
I want what they want. And every other guy who came over here and spilt his guts and gave everything he had once for our country to love us as much as we love it. That's what I want.
The difference between Rambo and those other two films is the tone.
I love that scene where he comes out of the mud bank, and it's typical of a lot of scenes in Rambo, where Stallone is magically able to predict exactly where the enemy's going to stand, what the enemy's going to do, and when the enemy is going to come. It leaves you with a couple of questions, like if that guy hadn't walked right past that exact spot of that muddy riverbank, what would Stallone have done? Count the worms?
He would have had he would have had a Southeast Asian facial.
Right, he just would have been standing there. And another thing, when he was, now this is a logistical problem, when he's packing himself with mud,
right,
how does he cover up his own arm, the last arm that he's doing the job? How does he get that last hand underneath the mud?
So what we have here is a movie full of logical mistakes, a movie with a premise that we don't agree with, and yet I go the same way with you as an action picture. Now, somebody will say there should be a higher principle here in movie criticism, but I'm just telling you, when I watched the film and I caught every mistake, I didn't catch the one about the hand coming out. Good for you on that. I sat there and said, this is fun, and the movie carried me along.
Rambo doesn't mind that it's silly. It's like a cartoon, a fantasy. and you're either on board or you aren't. It doesn't patronize you for liking it, and somehow also manages not to be insulting at the same time. There was a boiling, straight-faced rage underneath everything seen in Uncommon Valor and Missing in Action. Chuck Norris is a one-man tank of wrath, Old Testament style. Sylvester Stallone, who transforms his body from lean and mean in First Blood to something of Charles Bronson proportions, is here to rescue America from itself.
Do we get to win this time?
This time it's up to you.
He's been downtrodden and had his glory stolen from him. Like Rocky, like most Americans, he just wants the chance to get it back.
There's one thing I want you to do for me.
What?
Come here.
What?
Win. Win.
The movie doesn't even play at being realistic in the least. Gone is the wild-eyed, crazy, and bull-headed character from the first film. His clear suffering of post-traumatic stress is missing, and his killing of several police officers in the first film is not even referenced. No, not Galt. Like Rambo, I never blame that jerk's death on the war hero.
It's not my fault!
It's these guys. George Cosmatos, who directed Of Unknown Origin, was brought in, mostly as a camera operator, as I think it's pretty clear Stallone was the one calling the shots here. But Cosmatos and cinematographer Jack Cardiff give the movie a bright, colorful sheen, contrasting it heavily with the gritty, down-to-earth style of Ted Kotcheff in First Blood. The movie, at times, has an unnatural beauty, even during the action, but especially during the symbolic, messianic torture scene where Rambo is hung up, Jesus-like, in a gross pit of pig feces and mud, with leeches sucking on his body. A few years ago, YouTube channel Now You See It did a video on opening shots, saying a film's opening shot tells us almost everything we need to know about the film that follows, its themes, pacing, etc. First Blood opens with a man on a journey. Featured from afar, he soon comes into sharp focus. A Vietnam vet with a hopeful glance. And there's a lot to unpack there. But now, how does Rambo First Blood Part 2 open? No one will be talking about this movie's subtlety. This one takes place in a kind of heightened reality. Dramatic, plot-activated weather patterns, Russians, constant sweat, even Rambo's knife is bigger. In the first film, there was at least an attempt made to have the characters speak in realistic dialogue, but here it's almost entirely in action movie speak.
Survive a war. You gotta become war. Don't be a hero.
You're the one who's making the mistake.
Yeah, what mistake?
Rambo.
But if we look just a bit deeper, we can see some interesting things, in particular the manner in which they changed Rambo's character, now no longer a statement on the treatment of veterans from the Vietnam War, but an icon of a renewed American nation.
I'm reminded of a recent, very popular movie. And in the spirit of Rambo, let me tell you, we're gonna win this time.
Rambo is kind of a super soldier, but more than being just a man, he represents the entire fighting force. He's kind of a character that's bigger than life.
Not a man, a myth. To do this, they leaned heavily on the tropes of westerns. Rambo has many origin stories, but the most notable for the purposes of this film is Audie Murphy, one of the most decorated World War II veterans. In particular, his on-screen version, portrayed by the real-life man himself in To Hell and Back. The second Rambo film eschews the troublesome PTSD issues of the real-life man and focuses on the machine gun-toting war badass of the movie. But Rambo does not forget that after the war, Murphy became something of a staple in Hollywood westerns, and so Rambo becomes the man of both worlds trope, the half-breed.
I've never forgotten the lessons you taught me. You were my idol. You a black man and me half Indian.
Much is made of John Rambo's ancestry.
Born 7/6/47, Bowie, Arizona, of Indian-German descent. It's a hell of a combination.
Of course, Rambo enters the film something of an outcast, and it's the job of Julia Nixon's Coe to be a stand-in for the good Indian trope of old westerns.
Death everywhere. Just want to live, Rambo.
She suffers the same fate as most of those as well. At her death, Rambo takes on the traits of the so-called savage, a suntanned, bow and arrow wielding man of nature who blends into the wild. Don't think it's an accident that his weapon of choice is a bow and that he wears a headband. In a scene that is an intentional callback to First Blood, Rambo hunts down his would-be hunters and turns the tables. This also recalls the 1960 Western Flaming Star, wherein a half-breed hero does the exact same thing, also shirtless. And then there's the 1972 film Chato's Land, featuring Charles Bronson as a half-Indian being hunted across a wild landscape. He quickly turns into the hunter and picks off his pursuers one by one. Many have seen Chato's Land as an allegory for the Vietnam War, and so we come back full circle. And it's here that the movie shines brightest. From shot to shot, impact, suspense, tension. The ground-based combat is edited with expert care. Rambo shooting guys off a boat or blasting through Russians and VC guards in the POW camp are all given an excellent, weighty punch. There's plenty of squib work and explosions here, but it would feel like a dud were it not for Mark Goldblatt's expert editing, the sound mixing, a pulsing musical score, and some of the best sound effects of the decade. The quick cutting between the sweeping, zooming helicopter shots and the hut splintering and mushrooming out into giant yellow fireballs, combined with the beautiful lighting and cinematography, make for some of the most dynamic and epic action shots. The pyrotechnics in the film are immense. The explosions are so powerful they make the camera jolt and have the crew ducking for cover as they were filming. And all of this is orbited nicely around the singular performance of Sylvester Stallone as the near-impervious John Rambo.
I'm coming to get you.
I thought the first one was difficult, but the first one was almost Alice in Wonderland compared to this place.
I think the man is nuts because he's given himself things to do in this picture that nobody should ask of themselves, and he does them.
There's a little bit of madness that seems to permeate my brain when I'm doing a character like this. It seems like
You start to believe that you can do this?
I believe sometimes that I want to do that stunt. And what they do is they fire that gasoline from a cannon, and you mark it off about 30 feet away, and as they fire, you hopefully that it's the same amount every time. And as you run, if you keep a certain speed, you'll just clear this ball of fire. If you don't, we're having Rice Krispies.
Rice Krispies tonight.
Stallone has transformed himself again. As he had begun doing during the last Rocky film, Sly was working with bodybuilders like Franco Columbu and even Arnold Schwarzenegger to change his body to match his film roles.
The character dictates that he's kind of a fighting machine. He doesn't have a family, doesn't have a past, doesn't have a future. All he is geared towards is combat. So I think, and I've known men like that, so all they do is, everything is physical, right. Constantly working on, looking for ways to perfect themselves. It was about 8 months of training, 4 hours a day, toughing myself up, the SWAT combat courses, the archery courses.
When we first started the show, he called me over to show me how good he was with it. And I just thought, well, let's see what he can do. And he was damn good.
Yeah! Dead center, how about it?
Following Missing in Action and coming out the same year as Missing in Action 2 and Commando, Rambo First Blood Part 2 definitely made a strong case for the new American action style. Blood, big guns, and lots of bullets, and the shiny, ripped muscles to match. Rambo First Blood Part 2 is quite the experience. It's almost totally disassociated from the first movie in the series. You're no longer even rooting for an underdog so much as you're pumping your fist in the air and shouting hell yeah for every bad guy taken out or explosion witnessed. And truth be told, it feels like that was every intention.
It's something that is that hard to coordinate. The exploding, the firing, the shooting, the acting, the atmosphere, everything. And it all comes together in one fluid movement is
Well, just about the ultimate high.
This is a fun ride meant to be enjoyed. First Blood was a stayover from the political turmoil and uncertainty of the 1970s. Rambo 2 is an 80s cheeseburger action flick. A damn great one at that. And over the next few years, this was the action film to beat, and everyone would try and do what Stallone had done here or better. In terms of muscles, guns, and action, the arms race was on. Thanks for watching. As always, here's some bits of trivia. With more patrons, here's more trivia. In the original Cameron script, there's a scene where Rambo rises out of the water like Chuck Norris in Missing in Action, but instead of an M60, he has a Russian rocket launcher he fires at an attacking helicopter. The actual film has him firing a rocket from the cockpit of a landed helicopter at a hovering one, all while several rescued POWs are sitting directly behind him. I think Cameron's use of a similar scenario in True Lies is his commentary on the film's version of this, as the filmmakers on Rambo forgot about the backblast of the rocket launcher. Another interesting thing to note about this scene is there was a split-second insert of Rambo pulling the trigger of the Russian-made RPG from the boat sequence earlier in the film. Very odd. Julie Nixon, who plays Kobau here, is also in the movie Sidekicks, starring Chuck Norris. In a dream sequence of the main character in that film, Nixon is in a fantasy version of Missing in Action. Effectively meaning she is in both Rambo 2 and the film that inspired it. My favorite bit from the original Cameron script had Rambo fighting the guy in the helicopter. Rambo gets knocked out of the helicopter but manages to grab onto the minigun mounted on the side, swings it around so it's pointing back in, and blasts the guy who was fighting into a fine mist. Stallone would use a bit of this when he made the fourth Rambo film. And that's it. Once again, thanks for watching. See you next time.
He thinks he's Rambo.
Rambo is a pussy.